What you're looking at is the selector switch to select the selectivity of a Collins 51J-1. Now, this is a wafer switch. I cleaned it during my escapade on the radio, and it's a regular single wafer switch, very simple. And I noticed after I got the radio semi-calibrated and everything, one of the AM broadcast stations was real low. And I'm saying to myself, what did I do wrong? So I leave the room, radio's on, and I come back in, and the radio's real loud. I'm going, okay, I got a thermal problem. So I start playing the game with the tubes. You know, you pull one tube in, let it cool down. I did all these different tests. And then finally I said, all right, let me wait for it to go bad again. And about 20 minutes later, it went bad again. And then when I went over near the radio, it came back up again. And I'm like, oh, this is the stuff that when you're a repairman, you hate. You hate intermittents. Because sometimes they can go away for 2 or 3 days. So I start saying to myself, let me move all the controls. And the control for the selectivity, the only time I touched it is when I cleaned it. And it was totally dead. No signal was going through the selectivity lever in the off position. Let's put it that way. Now in the off position, there's a crystal on the back of here, and the IF frequency goes through this crystal. And there's various settings with the phasing control to get the kind of selectivity that you want. So I cleaned the connections for it when it's in the off position. And I started moving around this thing. I'm noticing if I tap it, the radio goes loud. I tap it again, it goes low. And I'm like, I've been in on that switch. I cleaned it. Well, since I've cleaned it, some of the track, it would be the common track. See, on a wafer switch, you got a common contact. It's got a connector or a pair of fingers that rides on it, and that's your common. And then that common unit that goes along, it has an arm off of it that touches each selector pickup, so you can go between different selections. So I'm looking, I'm like, it's turned black again. Well, besides going black again, there's like a running mess down here that's green. All right, so I'm looking at this, and this has been sprayed with several different things over the years, and something is still on it. Now, I remember, if you watch my videos, I mentioned that some of the switches they were really bad, and they still seem to have like WD-40 on them. I don't know what it is, but I know someone's been in this switch originally because the screw and nut to hold the case on that section was loose. So they must have realized the switch was dirty, and they sprayed it with whatever they sprayed it with. They moved it back and forth a few times. It started working. I went in there, and I started cleaning the connections. I was worried there was my fingernails are really long. I was afraid there was connections on this side of the wafer that I couldn't see. So I jiggled it, I tapped it, and then sometimes jiggling it and tapping it wouldn't make it get stronger. And I'm like, that's impossible. I know I've cleaned this switch. So I start looking in there, and I'm noticing the common track is turned black. Or it's got a black stripe down the middle of it again. I'm like, no, I cleaned that with an eraser. I know I cleaned this switch. So I said to myself, you're going to have to take this out, because we're going to have to neutralize whatever's on there. I used some alcohol. I'm not going to go right for the baking soda. Probably should go for baking soda. But this is the stuff that you get. And people say, I sprayed some stuff in there. It works fine. Then they pass it to the next guy. And the next guy pulls his hair out. He gets frustrated, puts the radio away. See, I got the radio to work really well. I had it on the bench. And then I'm saying to myself, look, you can't really go any further with the radio unless I want to do a full restoration. So I basically turn it on one last time. and it's WEEU out of Berks County, and it's a fairly strong station, and it's really low. And I go to different bands, and they seem to be okay. I go back to the AM broadcast band. WEEU is too low, and I'm like, okay. So I told you, I left the room, and when I come back, it was playing loud. I'm going, okay. So it turned out to be when the radio heats up, the switch makes contact better. So the switch needs to be clean. I'm gonna set it up in a vise, and I'm gonna really work it over with the Q-tip and the alcohol and the dribble of green slime that's down the back side of it. But I don't believe in spraying switches with anything because it's a short-term thing. And I told you, we had a television set in the living room, and my dad was a TV repairman, and we'd have a switch on one of the channels. We'd have to jiggle the channel selector. So my father would open the back of the TV set. He'd take the cover off the tuner, and he'd spray everything with blue mist, blue foam, whatever the stuff was. Now, the channel that was going bad was a channel that we used a lot, and the contacts were wearing down. Now, he would spray this blue stuff, and all the channels would go bad. And then he'd always be pounding his foot on the floor, and the vibration would go along the floor, and the TV set, the picture would clear up. And I'd be laying in bed trying to fall asleep. He'd be out there watching the news, and you hear him pounding on the floor. So I'd get up and jiggle the television set. And if you said something the next day, he didn't even know he was doing it, or he didn't want to admit that he was doing it. But that stuck in my mind. That was one of the first things that goes wrong with a switch, and someone keeps putting it off. And I do that once in a while on certain things. I procrastinate. And what's funny is one of the things with switches is in a car, there's so many of them, and if one of them doesn't work, the car won't start. Now, the other day, I'm coming up the street, and I thought I saw my one neighbor went over there working on his car. So I walk over, and it was this other kid I knew with a friend, and he's up in the fuse box, and he's got one of them light bulb units from Harbor Freight, and I'm talking to him. Both those kids knew about CNC, and they're doing laser cutting at this place. And I mentioned, is it so-and-so place? Yeah, it is. I walk by it all the time. So we got talking, and I said, let me go through my mind all the times that a switch was bad and the car wouldn't start. Now, one of the things is you used to call it a Bendix gear on the back of a starter, and that can get a bad spot. So what you do is you have someone in the car, and you tap the starter, and you have them start the car, and it'll get to a good section when you tap it, and it's like Russian roulette. So I'm familiar with that. I rebuilt the starter. I put a new Bendix gear on my starter when it did that. So I know about that. And then I'm talking to the kid, and he says, I got it all the way up here, the voltage up here. It's up to a relay. He's pretty sure the relay is good. And I said, well, let me go through all the things. So one of the things was I had a friend that when he got in the car to start it, he would take his left hand and put it behind the steering wheel and pull up on the stick, not the stick shift. There would be the selector switch for park neutral drive, Prundle. We'll call it the Prundle, park neutral reverse drive, Prundle, and low. Okay, Prundle. My one friend used to call it the Prundle. So you hold the Prundle, and you pull up on it as you turn the key, and the car would start. So I said to my friend, what is going on? He says, oh, they want a lot of money to change the switch down in the column, the steering column. So for all the years he had the car, that's how he would start that car. So I'm telling him that story, and I just said to the kid, put it up in park, and put it in park and out of park and into drive, back and forth a few times. Well, he did. He 1, 2, 3, and then when he put it back in park, the truck started rolling backwards, and he put his foot on the brake, and I'm like, uh-oh. And they're looking at me. I said, that's a wedge of plastic that goes in the transmission in between gears. That's what I was told. Well, the kid right away goes, you got it. And he goes under the car, and he puts that unit that popped out. It popped off the transmission. He puts it back in. He says, you got it. So he says the kid and the truck started up. I said, well, I got to give you credit too, because you knew from what I was telling you about that switch. And he says, it's a cable that runs down. So I actually thought, my friend told me that switch is in the steering column. It's actually could be down from a cable down in the transmission. So anyway, the truck got working. But I just want to tell you, intermittent switches, and intermittent is a nasty, nasty thing. And over the years, I always got those units. People would say to me, we can't find it. And we used to use freeze spray. And we had a heat gun, an Ungar heat gun. And it's like a hair dryer. And you heat the circuit board up, and then you cool it with freeze spray. And you get it to go between the temperature range at which the IC would stop working. And it wasn't a bad solder connection. It was inside the IC. But if you tried fixing that unit would just start working. And then you'd send it out and get to the guy who might be colder, or from just sitting a few days, when he goes to turn the computer on, it doesn't come up. He sends it back to you. You turn it on, it doesn't come on. You walk away from it, come back from lunch, turn it on, it comes right up. Those are the worst. And I used to specialize in that. And we used to use freeze spray and the Ungar heat gun. And you would find it. Oh, and sometimes when you're doing that between hot, cold, it cures it and it doesn't uncure. It just keeps working. You can't. Now I used to put those circuit boards up on the shelf and mark them. And I got a guy who took over my job for a few weeks. He sent them all out. The ones I said it's got a really bad problem, really hard. It's almost impossible to find it. You know, next inventory, write this board off. Well, he got in my job and he's bragging, I fixed every board you couldn't fix. He shipped all those out. There were like 15 of them. And they all came back. And the boss calls me in the office. He says, you're going back over there. He says, he just had 15 DOAs come back in. So I went over to look at them. And I had marked the boards with a magic marker in a special way near the date of the board. And it would be one of those boards. And I went over to him and he goes, I fixed those boards. And I said, no, they're all back. They're all DOAs. And he got real upset because he wanted to move up in the company without really doing the work. But it was so amazing. But when you have an intermittent, it's the worst. And this switch, I know I cleaned those contacts because I showed you that switch. And there's something still on that contacts that are causing them to turn black again. And I don't know if it's WD-40. I don't know if it's the other company that I will not mention, because people think that stuff's a miracle cure. And I saw this one person fixing a digital clock, a pseudo digital clock, and instead of opening up that section where there's a bunch of little wafer switches, that person just sprayed that chemical in. And look, it works. Yeah, it works for the video. And then you put that clock away, or you use it, and in 2 or 3 months, that pin that you sprayed the acid on, or the cleaner, gets black again, and then that digit goes out again on the clock. And like I told you, the real way to fix it is you use an eraser. I showed you my eraser pencils that I bought. You clean it up, you put a little Vaseline on there, something as a lubricant. And that's it, it's fixed. It'll go for another 20 years. And I did VCRs like that. And I was fixing stuff nobody else could fix because I track it down. But an intermittent is a horrible, horrible thing to deal with. And one of the I might have told you a story again before. The hardest one was a friend of mine had a car. And every time he slammed the door on the car, it would blow a fuse. So he kept telling me it happened. He went out with a bunch of people at a dinner, and they used his car. And when they come back, they had the problem. So he demonstrated it once. He put a 30 amp fuse in. He put it in the socket. He opened and closed the car door very gently. He then says, watch this. He slams the car door. Now he pulls the fuse out, and he shows me it's blown. So I take the fuse. It's one of those modern ones with the plastic and the spade lugs that come out. I went down in the cellar, and I soldered a light bulb across it. And I said, watch this. I said, plug it in. And he said, what's that? I said, slam the car door. And when you slam the car door, you see that light blink. He goes, what's that? I said, well, if you had a fuse in there, it would burn out. I said, now we can locate this. He goes, what do you mean? We can locate it. Watch. Open it up. Open the car door, and I go around the car and I'm hammering with my fist. And I got back to a cigarette lighter. When they were out at the dinner, one of the people used a cigarette lighter. It went bad, and he put the pieces down inside the hole. And when you slam the car door, the part would short out and blow a 30 amp fuse. And on the schematics, it didn't show that fuse for the car. He had the schematics for the car. He got it. A friend of his at a repair center, and I'm like, so I had to do it my way, my blinking light. So I took the cigarette lighter unit pieces out. I handed it to him, and then he starts slamming the door, watching, and the light's not blinking. Now he puts the fuse in, and he must have slammed that door 12 times. I went in the house, and he went back to this guy that couldn't find it, and he's telling him, oh, he took a light bulb and a burnt fuse, and he's telling the story. So I'm at work telling the story, and a guy sitting behind me goes out to his car and takes all the cigarette lighters out and brings them into the shop. And then he goes back out at lunchtime, puts a new fuse in, and he slams his car door a few times, and it doesn't blow the fuse. He says, I've been going crazy with this. And I think this fuse might have had the wiper on it. It had something else on it that you needed. And he says, oh man, he goes, and he would yell at people if they slammed the car door when they got in the car, because he knew it would blow the fuse. But those intermittents, those are the tough ones. And if you give up too soon, you're going to get more of them. It's like a karma thing. It's like it's us against them. And the short circuits and the opens and all that, they're just sitting there waiting to happen. And if you give up on something, the same problem is going to show up in something else. And that's why I tell people, you got to finish your projects. You can't keep putting them aside because they don't work. You got to rethink it and stay with it until you get it working. Because every time you make a breakthrough, it helps you with the next project. You realize when there's something wrong, you go, I've seen this before. And hopefully you have a good memory. I think that's it. All right, that's it.